Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum and welcome back in lecture number 29. Today we are going to revise the lecture 7 to lecture 11. In our previous lecture we revised from lecture number 2 to lecture number 6, and we saw different chapters like the characteristics of Islamic economic system, and then based on those characteristics or the salient features we derived principles of Islamic economic system. And then we saw that there are different systems in the world like capitalism, socialism, communism and Islam, and the most practiced system, which is capitalism, we discussed it in a greater detail, and we saw that there are certain disadvantages and advantages. But the disadvantages, they seem dominant in the system. Like if we see the concentration of wealth, it is only in few hands. If we look at the global wealth, we saw that 99.9% of the people in the world, they have only 19% of the total GDP of this world, whereas 0.1% of the people in this world, they have more than 80% of the total GDP. And likewise, we compared it with the socialism and communism. We saw the comparison of these four systems, and also we saw the evolution of money, and I recommended you to watch that documentary again. And we saw the concept of deposit multiplication, that how a deposit, which we know as a seed money, it multiplies into many times. Like if the reserve requirement is 10%, the seed money would convert 10 times and it would grow. For example, a deposit of 100,000 would grow into a deposit of 1 million. And if the reserve requirement is 25%, the deposit will grow 4 times. And the assumption is that all the money that circulates in the economy, we keep that money into the banks. And normally this is the practice. We keep only a small amount into our pockets or into our homes, and the major balance or the main amounts or the principal amounts, they stay into our accounts. So we assume that all the balance remains in the bank. Whatever is loaned out again is deposited into the banking system. That bank may be the same bank or it may be any other bank. So this way deposit multiplication takes place, credit creation takes place, and it creates the potential of the buyers as well. The potential of 100,000 is converted many times, and it means now there are more people in the economy to make purchases. And for the same product, if there are more than one customer, the demand would increase, and it means the prices will appreciate. And this phenomena of deposit multiplication or debt creation, it leads towards inflation as well. And in this lecture, we are supposed to revise from lecture number 7 to 11, and I hope you will better understand the concepts we have already discussed. And in this lecture, what was the lecture number 7? We studied the concept of factors of production under Islamic economic system. And to understand it properly, we studied the concept of factors of production in the conventional economic system. And as you know all, that in the conventional system we have 4 factors of production: land, labor, capital and entrepreneur, and sometimes it is also known as organization. And all these factors, they have their own rewards. For example, land, the owner of the land is the landlord, and the reward for this factor of production is rent. And in land we include all the natural resources that we can extract from the land and that we have on the land. And then the labor, one of the other factors of production. The laborer is the owner of this factor, of course. And then the reward are wages, the salaries. And then this is a human factor. The nature of this factor is the human factor. And we have capital. And in capital we have money, and we have the capital equipments as well. And the reward for that is interest. And these are man-made factors. And we can see the money, it has been created by man, and if we look at the capital equipments, the machineries, the plants, all such, the vehicles, and every such assets which have been created by man or by the labor, they are known as the capital equipments, and they are categorized into the capital factor of production. And then there is enterprise, which is created by entrepreneur, and the reward is profit, because the entrepreneur is the one who faces the risk, and the one who faces risk, they earn profit, and they might face losses as well. But with risk, profit is associated, and with usage, the rent or salary, with the usage of services, the rent and salary or things like that, they are associated. And these are man-made factors, like the enterprise, they are man-made factors. Now, the capital is recognized as money and physical capital. And the conventional literature suggests that reward of capital is interest rate against the services of the physical capital too. And we see that in capital, we have two categories, that is money and physical assets, like equipments, the machinery, different tools. And the capital reward is interest. So the literature suggests that for the use of capital equipments, reward is interest, and for the use of money, reward is interest. So here we see a kind of confusion, because the capital equipment perform certain services and they are used in manufacturing, and then the reward is interest, whereas the money, which is only a piece of paper, it cannot be used into any production process, rather it can be converted into different capital forms, and then we have reward for money as well. So this is kind of confusion, that a factor which can not be used into the production process, it has a certain reward, and a factor which can be used into the production process, that has also the same reward, whereas the other factors of production like land and labor, they are paid in rent and wages for their services, whereas the capital equipments and the money capital, they are paid in interest. So the capital equipment, like other factors of production, land and labor, provide services, but the compensation process is different, which creates confusion. So actually, or ideally, the capital equipments along with labor and land, they perform certain services, they provide a service. So for their services, the reward should be kind of rent or the wages or whatever possible amount, whereas under the conventional theory, the factors of production which are ranked under capital, they include cash, and like the monetary resources, and the capital equipment resources. So for both of these things, reward is same, and this is a confusion. And interest rate should enter into the reward of factors of production only if money or finance is treated as an explicit separate factor of production capable of providing a service. But in the conventional economic theories, cash is not taken as an explicit factor of production that can be used as a part of production process, whereas it is treated as same as that of capital equipment. Now let's discuss the factors of production under the Islamic framework. In Islam, these factors of production, what we saw in the conventional system, they are divided into two parts. One is the consumed inputs, the other one is the factor inputs. The factor inputs, they are those inputs that don't get consumed in the production process. For example, the labor, the capital equipments, the land, and all such type of inputs which are not consumed in the production process, we can tag them as factor inputs. And whereas there are consumed inputs, like those inputs that are consumed during the production process, and they lose their original shape and they are converted into some other shape. For example, the fuel, raw materials and also the monetary resources. We see that they can only qualify to become a consumed input because the raw materials, they change their shape into some other material, into some other finished goods. The fuel is consumed in the production process, and the materials like plastic, they are also consumed in the production process. So the same way, monetary resources, they are also consumed, and they are consumed in a way that if you want to get something with these monetary resources, you can purchase certain consumed inputs and factor inputs. And when you convert the monetary resources into some other factor of production, only then you can utilize it. So it is treated as consumed input in Islamic financial system. So the money as a factor of production is recognized as a consumed input and becomes useful only when it is converted into consumed input or factor input. It cannot be used as it is, so it is not a factor input. It should be converted to some other form, only then it can be used into the production process. And money itself is not considered a factor of production, but it has the potential to become a factor of production. And then out of the factor inputs, there are two categories: the hired factors of production and the entrepreneurial factors of production. The hired factors of production are those which get reward for their services, and they don't assume any risk. For example, all those factors that earn ujrat, as we know the word ujrat, it means wages or rent for the properties. For example, labor earns wage, land earns rent, machinery would earn rent, and these factors, they don't assume any risk. They don't assume the risk of loss or profits. They don't earn profits. So when they don't assume risk, they don't earn profits. So rather, they earn only ujrat, that is the rent and the wages. Whereas the entrepreneurial factors of production are those factor inputs that assume risk. For example, the labor, when they perform as managers or the workers in any company, they earn ujrat. They are paid for their wages. But the same person, when he or she starts a business and becomes an entrepreneur, he or she faces risk. And now the reward is profit. When the reward is profit against a risk, then this is an entrepreneurial factor of production. And under the Islamic framework, all the factor inputs, they have the potential to become an entrepreneurial factor of production, and likewise they have the potential to become an hired factor of production. So we were discussing the reward for the factor inputs and for the consumed inputs. Consumed inputs, they will be consumed, and the factor inputs, they can be categorized into hired and entrepreneurial factors. And for factor inputs that are opt to become hired factor of production, the reward is ujrat or rent. So money not being a factor input, money is not a factor input, it's a consumed input. So money cannot earn any ujrat, it cannot earn any rent. So the rent for this factor of production in conventional economic system is interest. So under the conventional system, reward for money is interest. So in itself, money cannot earn any reward in Islamic economic system. Rather, money have to be converted into some other factor input to earn any reward. And if it is converted into an other consumed input, it will be consumed. It will have a price for it. Whereas if it is converted into factor input, then that factor input can assume the risk and can earn profits, and they may suffer losses. And there are certain institutional framework in Islamic economic system. For example, the commodity markets, factor markets for hired factors of production, institution of participation, institution of social insurance. So the commodity markets, they are very much important. They are given very high importance in the Islamic economic system, and Islamic laws regulate the commodity market operations and ensure the free market system with restrictions on the bad practices like monopoly, misallocation of the resources. And the factor market for hired factors of production, only those goods or resources can be rented or hired which are not consumed while they are used. And renting or hire is the sale or purchase of the benefits or services, as in the concept of ijara. I hope you remember that in ijara or in leasing, when the rents are received, they are actually the price of their beneficial use. The asset has some beneficial use, and what we call as usufruct, for that usufruct a price is paid, and that is known as the rent. So that is the contract of ijara. And the assets are resources that generate benefits in the form of real goods, like tree giving fruits or animals giving milk, cannot be rented for such benefits, because in case of ijara, the assets which provide certain services can be rented out, but those assets which produce physical goods, for example, the trees, they cannot be rented out because their reward, their fruit is kind of physical commodity, and the animal giving milk cannot be rented out. So in Islamic financial system, the assets which have their services which can be used for beneficially, they can be rented out. And the financial resources cannot be rented because they cannot generate any service without being consumed. So the financial resources like monetary resources, or what we know as cash, it cannot be rented out for interest because they don't perform any service unless they are consumed. So they are consumed input, they are consumed factor, so it cannot be rented, it cannot earn any interest on it. And then renting of land for agriculture purposes, a minority of Islamic scholars, they think that it should not be done so, जिसको हम उर्दू में लैंड को ठेके पे देना कहते हैं. Whereas majority of scholars, they think land provides a service of production. There are certain inputs, and then there are certain outputs. So the land only performs a service, so it can be rented out. And the physical resources, that is any physical resource that is capable of generating productive service, is capable of being renting or hired. So land is supposed to be just like a machinery which provides the service of being productive when inputs are used. And then institution of social insurance, Islam emphasizes it a lot and has created certain systems that the people, they are insured in the system socially. For example, it has been said in Quran, Allah says that, and in their wealth the beggar and the outcast has due share. The poor, they have the share into the wealth of the wealthy people. And the institution of zakat and sadaqat and charity is in place such that the people can be helped out. And the system ensures minimum living needs for everyone, so the entrepreneurial factors would be encouraged to take risk for entrepreneurial factors of production would increase, which means welfare of the people. When the entrepreneurial factors of production, they become operational and the demand for entrepreneurial factors is higher, it means there will be more value addition into the economy, there will be more jobs creation into the economy, and it will help the society. As we know that equilibrium is achieved through the forces of market, that is demand and supply forces. So in this case we will study the topic under the following heads, like supply and demand of hired factors of production, and then supply and demand of entrepreneurial factors of production, and then an equilibrium will be achieved based on these supplies and demands. So supply and demand of hired factors of production, marginal productivity will determine the demand for the human resources and physical capital. If the resources are the factor inputs, they would consider that their efforts as a labor, they are more productive and the ujrat is to their satisfaction, they might not opt to become an entrepreneurial factor. And if the risks are higher to become an entrepreneurial factor, the more supply will be there into the hired factors of production. And supply of labor will be determined by the marginal utility of layer to the laborer. And at the same time, if the reward of labor is low, then the labor might compare the reward with the layer. So if they feel that if they don't do anything, they are better than doing something, so they won't involve into the labor activities. They don't perform any services. And supply of capital goods will be determined by the opportunity cost of producing capital goods. And the capital goods that can be used to the manufacturing process or into the production process, if they feel that if they are involved into the production process, they may not earn as much as they can earn if they are rented, if they rent their services. So the marginal utility or the opportunity cost will determine their availability into the hired factors of production. And the rental of capital goods will really be rental, not the interest. So as it is clear that in the capital section, in the capital, which is a factor input, money is not included into the capital. Capital means capital inputs, like anything which is capable of providing services and it has a beneficial use. Money in itself doesn't have any beneficial use, it is a consumed input. So this is the equilibrium in the factor market. If we see here, this graph shows that here along the y-axis we see the wages, and along the x-axis we see the supply of the resources. It may be the human resources like in the form of labor, and then it may be the capital resources, the capital inputs, and this is demand. Let's suppose we are talking about the demand for labor, the hired factor of production for the labor, what is the demand as a hired factor of production, and then what is demand for entrepreneurial factor of production in the system. So we see that SR is the total available resources and SU is the supply of labor which is engaged in the production process as labor, and they are earning a reward which is U, what we know as ujrat. So this is the supply curve of this labor, and this is the demand for labor. So at a higher price or higher wage rate, demand for labor is lower, whereas at the lower wage rate, demand for labor is maximum. But the balance has been achieved at this level, what we know as SU. So anything beyond SU into the available resources for labor, we can call them that these are the potential resources for to become an entrepreneurial resources. So but we see that from SU to SR, we have divided it into S naught. So these are the resources which are indifferent. So sometimes they think to become an entrepreneurial resource, but the other time they don't feel to become an entrepreneurial. But beyond S naught, these resources at no cost will become a hired factor of production. They want a higher demand, they want a higher return, so they will become an entrepreneurial resource at all time. So before we discuss it in a greater detail, let me tell you what are these mean, what these SR, SU, SR minus SU, what does they mean. So the total resources, they are SR, then resources implied on ujrat, they are SU, as I mentioned there, where the demand curve cuts the supply curve of the labor. And then SR minus SU, they are the entrepreneurial supply of resources. When we talk of the factor inputs regarding labor and the entrepreneur, so SR minus SU, the section that is on the right side, which is the potential entrepreneurial factor of production. And then SS is the supply curve of hired resources, and S naught is the resources available at constant opportunity cost, and DD represents the demand curve for the resources. And at this level, this up to this point, that is S naught, these are people who can work if they are paid an ujrat up to this level. But after this point, the wage rate decreases. So now they either will sit idle and they will compare their marginal utility to sit idle, to be at layer, or to involve into some activities to earn some ujrat. But beyond S naught, the people, they demand a higher reward. So these are the people who will engage in entrepreneurial activities. And there are two things they need further elaboration before we go to the demand for entrepreneurial resources. How the total supply of resources is determined as far as labor supply is concerned. And then how the remainder SR minus SU becomes entrepreneurial factor of production. So if we consider the human resources, we have two categories of labor and entrepreneurs. Labor is the hired factor of production and entrepreneur is the entrepreneurial factor of production out of human resources. Now the labor supply is measured in time, in terms of time. For example, number of workers into number of working hours per worker. So this will determine the total labor supply. And factors that affect labor supply, they are the size of population, size of working population, and number of working hours. And then how to increase the labor supply. If there is more demand for hired factors of production into the economy, then how we can increase the labor supply. There are few possibilities, like we increase the number of labor or we increase the number of working hours. So these are the means that we can increase the labor supply. Population growth by natural growth or immigration. We might invite workers from other parts of the world, like we see in the case of Malaysia, in the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia. They invite immigrants from all over the world such that their labor requirement can be fulfilled. And then if you can increase the monetary reward, that is, if the ujrat is increased, it would mean the people who are sitting idle, they were also involved into the activities to perform their services as labor. And then import of labor from other countries, this is one of the tools. And retirement age can be increased. For example, in most countries, retirement age is 60. If it is increased to any number of years, like to 670, we can increase the supply of labor. And then school leaving age from 16 to 17. If we increase the school leaving age, what would it mean? That there are few numbers available for that time period that can involve into the labor activities. So this will reduce the labor supply. And equilibrium in the factor markets, as far as the supply and demand of entrepreneurial factors are concerned, that SR, that is the total supply of the labor for human resources, size of the population and growth rate of the population. Human resources, if cannot get ujrat to their desired level, may sit idle and become entrepreneurial factor of production. If the ujrat or the reward for their labor they think is less, they will not perform the hired factors of, they will not become a hired factor of production. Rather, they will opt to become an entrepreneurial factor of production. And if they don't become an entrepreneurial factor of production, they may sit idle and they don't do anything. And S, that is for capital goods. If we are talking about the supply of capital goods, then in the country will be the total output of capital goods in the country minus exports plus imports. The stock of capital goods more than the demand in the economy will become entrepreneurial factor of production, otherwise will be depleted by annual payment of zakat. If we have capital goods and if we include into the capital like gold and silver and different assets, so if we don't imply them into as an entrepreneurial factor of production, or if we don't imply them to become a hired factor of production, they will be depleted. So they have to become a factor of production. So if there is no demand for those capital assets to become a hired factor of production, then they will opt to become an entrepreneurial factor of production. And the factors that determine the demand for entrepreneurial resources may be listed as the capability to visualize a productive activity that would yield him an expected profit greater than the prevailing level of ujrat. For example, if a person can see an opportunity and they can think, and they think that their ujrat is lower than the possible reward than the possible profit if they engage into the entrepreneurial activity. If they can capitalize onto that opportunity, then they will opt to become an entrepreneur. And risk involved in initiating the project. If to start a project, risk is very high, the entrepreneurs, they will become labor. They won't become an entrepreneurial factor of production, rather they will opt to become a hired factor of production. And then supply of other productive resources. If other productive resources can be streamlined easily, they might opt to become an entrepreneurial factor of production. But if it is difficult to arrange other factors, the other required factor inputs, then the people, they will opt to become a hired factor of production instead of entrepreneurial factor of production. And if there are institutional arrangements which are attractive to become an entrepreneurial factor of production, for example, if the governments provide certain guarantees, certain incentives to become an entrepreneur, then the people might opt to become an entrepreneur, and there will be more demand for entrepreneurial factors of production, and there will be lesser people available for hired factors of production. And when the demand for entrepreneurial factors of production increases, it would mean that there will be more competition for hired factors of production, and the rate of ujrat would increase. And the supply of different entrepreneurial factors of production raises each other's demand. Thus, availability of entrepreneurial capital, that is risk-bearing capital, will raise the demand for the entrepreneurial human resources, and vice versa. If there is more capital available, it would mean there are more entrepreneurial factors of production they are demanded. So they have their impact on the factors of production on each other. And if we look at the demand curve, if it shifts along the right or left side, so here you can see that if the demand curve shifts to the right, it would mean that there is more demand for the labor or for the capital equipments which could be used as a hired factor of production. So it would mean that a new balance will be achieved, and it may not be here, because when the demand would increase, it means a new balance will be achieved. It may be at this point. So the labor, with the demand, the wage should also be increased. And if the demand for hired factor of production increase, it means the people will opt to become a hired factor of production rather than entrepreneurial factor of production. And if the demand for hired labor decreases as the curve shifts to the left, so we can see here a new balance will be achieved. It may be at this point that wage rate would also decrease. Because of decreased demand, the wage rate will also decrease, and a new equilibrium will be achieved. And it would mean with an increase in the wage rate, the SU will shift to the right, and there will be a lesser proportion available for the entrepreneurial factors of production. But if it shifts from to this place, it means there are more people available for entrepreneurial factors of production, and the labor is available to become EFP. And the same way, capital equipments that can earn reward as a rent, the same treatment will be there for those factors of production. And this was the concept of equilibrium in the factor market, that the demand of one factor will affect the demand of other. So they compete each other to become hired factor of production and entrepreneurial factor of production. And in lecture number 9, we discussed the concept of time value of money in the Islamic finance. As we know that in Islam, money is a potential capital. Money in itself is not a capital, as just in the previous slides we discussed. Money in itself cannot become a factor input, rather it is a consumed input. So it cannot earn any reward for its services because it will be consumed. So anything that is consumed cannot earn any reward in the form of rent or profit. So we have the concept of money that is it is a consumed input, and it cannot earn any reward in the form of interest. And then cash versus credit price in sale transaction. So in Islam, it is allowed that the transaction can take place at the spot against the payment, and there can be credit transactions, that is for delivery of the asset, of the commodity, of the subject matter of the sale, but the price might be paid after a certain time period. And the monetary valuation of time in credit transaction. So here comes the problem that if we receive a price at the spot, it means there is no concept of time value of money, and there is no problem to solve as far as time value of money is concerned. But if the asset or the commodity is sold at credit, it means the payment will be received after a time period, maybe a week, a month, or 6 months, a year. So then what will happen to the time value of money? So here Islamic financial system allows that cash price can be different than the credit price. So for a credit transaction, price can be charged higher. So the increased amount or the increased price will justify the time value of money. And then economic value of time, as I mentioned earlier, that the economic value of time will be determined, will be justified in the increased price of that commodity. And then we studied the comparison between the Islamic and conventional financial institutions, and let's compare both. Under the conventional system, money is a commodity besides medium of exchange and store of value. Therefore, it can be sold at a price higher than the face value, and it can also be rented out. Whereas the consideration or understanding of Islamic economic system regarding money is totally opposite. Money is not considered a commodity. It cannot be sold and it cannot be purchased at a price higher than its face value or lower than its face value. Even the claims that cannot be negotiated into the secondary market, which they don't represent a tangible asset. If the claims, they are a claim of debt, under the Islamic economic system, we cannot sell them except at their face value. So money is not a commodity, though it is used as medium of exchange. It can be used as a medium of exchange and store of value. Therefore, it cannot be sold at a price higher than its face value or rented out. We cannot rent it out for any reward, because money doesn't have any usufruct, and the beneficial use of money is not possible. Only we can convert it into some other capital asset, and then we can have a beneficial use. And the time value is the basis for charging interest on capital. Under the conventional system, the financial institutions, they charge interest as a justification of time value of money, whereas profit on trade of goods or charging on providing service is the basis for earning profits. So under the Islamic economic system, sale and purchase, that transaction would determine and that will justify the time value of money, as we discussed earlier. And interest is charged even in case the organization suffers losses by using bank's funds. Therefore, it is not based on profit and loss sharing. Under the conventional system, if the capital or the money is lent, so against that, the principal amount is recovered along with the interest on it. Whereas even if the business or the client suffers any losses, the conventional banks, they don't have any concern with that. They have to recover their principal amount with interest on it. Whereas Islamic banks operates based on profit and loss sharing. In case the business person has suffered losses, the bank will share these losses based on the modes of financing used, like musharaka and mudarba, and also under any mode of financing, according to the ownership of the bank, profits can be shared as per agreed ratios, but the losses will be shared according to the investments, according to the proportion of ownership. So whatever is the proportion of ownership of the bank have to face that percentage of loss. So under the conventional financial system, while disbursing cash finance, running finance or working capital finance, no agreement for exchange of goods and services is made. Only thing that is important is the loan which is forwarded to the client, and it will be recovered at an interest rate. Whereas under the Islamic financial system, the execution of agreements, it may be any agreement, for the exchange of goods and services is necessary. An underlying asset is required. while disbursing disbursing funds under Murabaha, Salam and Istisna contract. So even if you are in the sale modes of financing like Murabaha, Istisna and Salam, when you are disbursing cash to the client, actually there is an underlying asset. Otherwise, this cash cannot be forwarded. And the conventional banks use money as a commodity which leads to inflation. So when we use money to earn money, and it can create the inflation, as we discussed in our previous lecture, that the process of deposit multiplication creates increase the potential of the buyers, and it multiplies the demand into the economy. So when there is more demand for the available goods which have not increased, so that in that case the prices would increase. And the Islamic banking trends to create link with the real sectors of the economic system by using trade related activities. Since the money is linked with the real assets, therefore it contributes directly in the economic development. And under the Islamic economic system, money cannot be traded as commodity, it cannot be lent out, it can only be invested. So when the money is only invested, when the capital, it is converted into capital that is invested, so then it adds value into the economy and it creates more jobs, more opportunities and more wealth for the people. And the governing principles of Islamic banking are the prohibition of interest or riba-based transactions. As we know that the theory, the Quran, Hadith, everything suggests under the Islamic economic system that riba is not allowed in any of its form. And avoidance of speculation, that is gharar, the uncertainty. This is one of the risk management tools as well, that when there is uncertainty about any project, about any asset, and you don't know the details of that asset, of that commodity, you may avoid that. And you can only engage into an activity or trade activity or investment activities when you know all the details. For example, if you are going to purchase a car, the seller must disclose all the things, all the attributes, all the characteristics of that car. If there are some faults, that must be known to you. But if you are not aware of any fault, of any risk, and you feel that the risk is very high if I invest into such commodity, then you should avoid that. Uncertainty is avoided. It should be prohibited. And avoidance of oppression. Capitalism, as we know that, it leads to exploitation. That is exploitation of poor by rich, the servant by master, like that. Labor by the wealthy people. And then introduction of Islamic tax. So in Islam, an institution of zakat has been designed for certain benefits. For example, first of all, it will be a tool to make sure that wealth circulates into the economy. And then the people who have hoarded their wealth, when they have to pay zakat every year, it would deplete their wealth. And they have to bring their wealth out and they have to invest it into the economy. And it will make sure the wealth circulates into the economy. And financing of Sharia-approved activities and discouraging the production of goods and services which are not allowed in Islamic values. And under the Islamic financial institutions, they can only invest into Sharia-approved activities. And they will not invest into such activities which are declared as haram by Sharia. In this way, they can become more socially responsible and they can add value and they can be a good value addition for the economy. And continuing the same lecture number 10, we will make a comparison of Islamic banks with the conventional banks. The functions and operating modes of Islamic banks are based on the principles of Islamic Sharia, as mentioned in the previous slide, that every operation of an Islamic bank is bound to the Sharia limitations. And in the conventional banks, the functions and operating modes of conventional banks are based on fully man-made principles. So here we have divine sources for the Islamic banks, and in the conventional banking system, all the rules and regulations and the procedures, they are devised by man. And in Islamic banks, it promotes risk sharing between provider of capital and the user of the fund. So there is a mechanism of risk sharing, and when the people they share risk, they share profits. Whereas in case of conventional banks, the investors are the lenders, investor is the lender. is guaranteed of a predetermined rate of interest or return. So the lender is guaranteed their capital with an interest amount on it. And in Islamic bank, it also aims at maximizing profit but subject to Sharia restrictions. Islamic banks, they also maximize their profits but within the bounds of Sharia. They can only engage in halal business activities and they can earn some halal profits. Whereas conventional banks, their unrestricted profit maximization illustrated by derivative trading, deposit multiplication, and we see that under the conventional economic system, one of the tools is that deposit multiplication. That a seed money, which is, suppose as the example we have already discussed, that a seed money of 100,000 converts into a loan of 900,000 if the reserve requirement is 10%. So they can earn interest rate on that 900,000 against interest expense of a principal amount of 100,000. And in Islamic banks, in the modern Islamic banking system, it has become one of the service-oriented functions of the Islamic bank to be a zakat collection center, and they also pay out their zakat. Islamic banks, they not only collect zakat, but out of their own assets, they also pay zakat. And conventional banks do offer the services of zakat collection, but their depositors are reluctant to pay zakat from their accounts in conventional banks. So as we see this approach, that depositors in the conventional banks and maybe from the Islamic banks also, if they want to pay their zakat by themselves, but from the conventional banks we see that people either inform the bank not to deduct their zakat from their account or they withdraw their funds from their accounts. And in Islamic banks, participation in partnership business is the fundamental function of the Islamic banks. So whatever deposits they receive from the depositors, they invest it into different modes and they become partners with their clients. So there are different layers of partnership. First of all, the depositors and the bank, they have a relationship of mudarib and the capital provider. And then bank, being a fund manager, that is the deposit, which whatever deposits have been deposited into the bank will operate those deposits and will become partner with other clients and will use them for the services, to provide different kind of services. In conventional banking, lending money and getting it back with compounding interest is the fundamental function of the conventional banks. Money is a commodity and the motivation. So here, to multiply the money is the motivation, and to maximize the profits is the motivation. Whatever means they can use, it is allowed. Well, for example, riba, which is not allowed in Islamic economic system, the banks operating even in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, they are charging interest. And likewise, in almost all the Muslim countries, the Islam prohibits paying and charging of interest, but the conventional banks operating in these countries, they pay and they charge interest. And Islamic banks have no provision to charge any extra money from the defaulters except for compensation, and it is used for charitable purposes. So whatever amounts which are due from the clients, they are the debts against the clients. So if they don't pay on time, then the Islamic bank cannot charge any extra money because it will constitute riba. But they can charge a penalty, and that penalty will not become income of the Islamic bank. It will be donated to some charitable purpose. Whereas in conventional banking system, they can charge additional money as a penalty, and on that penalty amount as well, interest will also be charged. For example, in case of defaults or late payments, penalty will be charged, and that penalty will also become part of the debt, and it will also earn interest on it. And in Islamic banks, importance is given to the public interest or maslaha, that is the benefit of the society. Its ultimate aim is to ensure growth with fairness. So the objective of Islamic banking system is to add value into the economy, the growth with fairness. Whereas conventional banks, interest is the main objective. It makes no effort to ensure growth with equity. So their main objective is to lend money and to earn interest on it. Conventional banks, they are not concerned with the growth into the economy. Their only concern is their principal amount with some profit onto it, that is interest. And for the Islamic banks, it must be based on a Sharia approved underlying transaction, that any mode of financing Islamic banks they adopt, it should be Sharia compliant. It may be Musharka, Mudarba, Murabha, Salam, Istisna. The underlying asset or the core business activity which will be the objective of that transaction, that should be Sharia compliant. And in conventional banks, for interest-based commercial banks, borrowing from the money market is relatively easier. So in the conventional banking system, for whatever purpose, you can go to the bank. You should have a credibility. If you have a credibility, you can get a loan. And since it shares profit and loss, the Islamic banks pay greater attention to developing project appraisal and evaluation. As we saw in the previous lecture, in lecture number 27, that non-performing financing and assets, they were quite low. If we compare them with the industry averages, they were far better than the industry average, because the Islamic banks, they critically evaluate their clients, and they properly evaluate and appraise the projects. And in case of conventional banks, since income from the advances or loan is fixed, it gives little importance to developing expertise in project appraisal and evaluation. Risks are transferable at a price, that is insurance, because the Islamic banks, they would check the credibility of the client, and if client is credible, then they don't care what is the nature of the project and is it feasible or not. They are only concerned with their investment, that is the loan they have forwarded, with the return onto it, that is the interest. And greater emphasis is on the viability of the project. The conventional banks give greater emphasis on the credit worthiness of the client. So you can see the difference. You can see the focus of these two institutions, that in the Islamic banks, there are the projects that are undertaken, whereas in the conventional banking system, the creditor's worth is analyzed. And in Islamic banks, they can only guarantee deposits for deposit accounts, which is based on the principle of al-wadiya. Thus, the depositors are guaranteed repayment of their funds. However, if the account is based on mudarba concept, client have to share in a loss, in a position of loss. We have the concept of current account under the Islamic economic system and under the conventional banking system. So if it is a current account, the Islamic bank will guarantee the deposit. But if the account is based on a mudarba kind of transaction, then that account they might suffer losses. If there is a loss, then a proportion of loss will be placed against that account as well. And in the conventional banks, a conventional bank has to guarantee all its depositors. The conventional banks, they guarantee all their depositors. Whatever deposit you deposit into the bank, whatever money you deposit, it is guaranteed in the conventional banking system. It is not exposed to any kind of risk. Rather, you will be paid an amount of interest. And then we come to the lecture 11, that is Islamic modes of financing. We discussed different modes of financing. First of all, we will discuss the murabha that we covered in lecture number 11. So murabha is the sale transaction where seller declares or discloses all the costs involved into it plus the profit. And sale is defined in the Islam. Now, for a valid sale contract, there are certain requirements, and the definition of sale is that exchange of things of value with one another, with another thing of value, with mutual consent. When the two buyer and the seller, they have things of value, they can exchange those things of value for a valid sale contract. For example, if something is of no value, it doesn't have any use, it cannot be exchanged with something useful. So this is the components of a valid sale transaction. First of all, there is a contract between the buyer and the seller. There is an offer and acceptance between the buyer and seller for that subject matter. And the subject matter which is going to be sold or which is going to be exchanged, it should be in existence, and the ownership must be clear. The seller must be the owner of that asset, or if it is an agent of the owner, then there should be an agency agreement between the owner and the agent, and then the possession must be there, the physical possession, and the thing must be a valuable thing, and it must be known in its characteristics. And the subject matter of sale should be delivered at the time of sale, and the price must be clear and certain. For example, the price is per unit or price is per kilo, whatever denomination is there, that must be known and it must be quantified and in clear terms. And the possession must be physical or constructive. I have explained the constructive possession before, that when you purchase a car and the car is in the parking lot and you are given the key of that car, so it means you have got the constructive possession. Now you can use that asset, although you did not go to the car, but still you have the constructive possession. And the other one is physical possession. When you go to the car and you take possession of that car physically, now this car belongs to you. So this is the difference between physical and constructive possession. And then in a Murabaha transaction, there were three models, like the seller and the buyer. If the bank is a seller, the client is a buyer. So this is the two-party relationship, that is model 1. And the three-party relationship is that vendor is also involved. When the customer approaches the bank and the bank contacts the vendor and purchases the asset for the client, three parties are there. And the model 3 is, again there are three parties, but the relationship changes, that is the vendor and the client and the bank. So let's see what it takes shape. In the first model, it is a simple kind of sale transaction where the bank is the owner of the asset and bank, being the vendor, sells the asset to the client. The customer approaches the bank, purchases the asset and makes the payment. Now this payment in Murabaha transaction can be at the spot, it can be delayed, it can be in lump sum but delayed, but it can also be on the installment basis. And the price would include all costs. Price of the asset includes every cost of that asset, like freight, taxes, the legal fee if any, and agency cost, plus profit. Profit will also be disclosed. If it is not disclosed, then it is musawama. But when all these costs they are disclosed and the client knows them, this is a Murabaha transaction. And in the second model, client identifies the vendor. For example, if I want to purchase a car and I know that the car that I desire is with such and such vendor, then I will contact the bank and request the bank to help me purchase that car. Now the bank in the third step will contact that vendor. I will tell the bank, and then the bank will purchase that car and become the owner. And then when the bank has become owner of that asset, there will be a sale transaction, that the asset will be transferred to the client, the customer, and the payment will be made to the bank. And that payment, again, it can be at the spot, it can be lump sum payment after a time period, or it can be in the installments. And the third model, which is little complex and it is most practiced model in our system, the Islamic banks, they are following this model. So here the relationship changes. Now in the second model we saw that bank will purchase the asset from the vendor, but in this case let's see what happens. In the first place, customer approaches the bank to help purchase any asset, for financing any asset, and there will be signed a master Murabaha agreement between the bank and the client, and different details will be sorted out and terms and conditions will be decided. And after that, the bank appoints the client as an agent. So there will be an agency agreement. So in its capacity of agent, the client would contact the vendor and will purchase the asset, and then will request the bank to make the payment. and the bank can make the payment directly to the vendor and through the agent as well. And if it is paid to the agent, agent will make payment to the vendor and the bank can directly make the payment to the vendor. So at each step different documents will be prepared, and those documents will become part of the master murabha agreement. And now when the asset has been purchased by the agent and asset has arrived with the customer, and the ownership of that asset is with the bank. Now the asset is in the possession of client and the ownership is with the bank. Now bank as an owner will sell the asset to the client. The possession is already with the client. So there will be an offer and acceptance to make it a valid sale contract at the 6th step, and at the 7th step payment will be made to the bank. Now there is a problem into this transaction, and what is that problem? That for a valid sale contract we saw that the seller should have the possession of the asset, but here the asset goes directly to the possession of the client, that is the customer, and at no time the bank faced any risk. So where the risk of ownership is not there, it means there it is doubtful. And some scholars they think that murabha transaction should not be allowed. But this is the most practiced transaction among all the Islamic banks in the world. So this is one of the objections against murabha, that at no time the asset goes into the possession of the bank. So this is against the Sharia rules. So the asset should be transferred to the bank. Bank should become the owner of the asset, which the bank becomes, but the bank should have the physical possession of the asset as well. And then there can be a valid sale contract. So this is a small objection against this murabha transaction. And this is the most practiced model in the Islamic banking departments. Almost all the Islamic banks in the world, they practice this model, and it has its justification as well. For example, when the asset is purchased by the client as an agent, now the client knows that what is the specification of the asset, what are the plus and minus of the assets, what are the defects there, and if later on any defects are discovered, then this is the responsibility of the agent. This is not the responsibility of the bank. Now the bank has mitigated its risk and the risk has been transferred to the client in this case. So the client, being an agent of the bank, can procure the asset according to his or her desires. So this is one of the catches in this model. And this is all for today. We discussed, we revised the lecture starting from factors of production, and then we discussed a little bit about the money, concept of money in Islam, the time value of money concept, and then we discussed some comparisons between the dealings of money in the Islamic financial institution and the conventional institutions, and then we made some comparison between the banking institutions, that is the practices of Islamic banks and the practices of conventional banks, and also we discussed about the modes of financing, that is the first mode of financing we know as murabha. And this is all for today. Hope you enjoyed the lecture. Inshallah we'll see you in the next lecture. Till then, Assalamu alaikum.